Good morning. This is Jason Dean coming live at you again for yet another installment of Film Fanatic. Hope everyone's doing good. I am working my way down and working my way through to the last few movies for this bad boy here, which I've been doing lots of videos on. There's been there's 15 movies on this package alone, and that is a just horror collection of all of these different films. Pretty generic cover, It, you know, some company just churned this bad boy out. But so, you know, at face value, when I looked at this disc, and I got this again, I've been finishing up. I got one more movie to go in this collection, and I just started watching it last night, so I'm almost done. And when I first picked this up, I went to it was about 2 weeks ago. I went to Opera House Video, the great and kind of the last man standing when it comes to actual video stores in Maine. I think if I'm not mistaken, I think it's the last video shop in Maine that I know of, like actual video shop. So I've been going there for years, and they had this big sale, and this was one of the movies I bought. And when I first looked at it, I was like, it looked really generic, like just maybe run of the mill kind of, you know. And I figured, well, it's probably got movies I've seen on it that I've seen before in the past, or maybe movies that I own, and also like just they're probably just really bad quality movies as far as the actual quality of them. But then I checked it out, and I was like, wow, I was really intrigued by a lot of the movies that they had on here, where a lot of the movies I had not seen before. Again, just running through it, like I did a little bit of a run through of this whole collection before, but I'll do it again. It's got, one of the movies on here. It's got, well, a handful of movies that I have seen before and that I actually own. Night of the Living Dead, of course, the zombie classic by George Romero. One of the most groundbreaking zombie movies ever. I have a Criterion Collection version of that. That's and of course, what else can be said about that? I did a big show on that a while back. It's an amazing Blu-ray that I have. That the Criterion Collection's amazing. I was blown away when I came across it on Blu-ray, because Criterion has definitely changed over the years. It's definitely expanded. They have more of a broad variety of movies. They typically were known for their amazing editions of a lot of foreign films. And the other thing about Criterion that is hard, as far as I think just financially, is Criterion is their Blu-ray packages are amazing, and they have 4K also, but they're insanely expensive. I've seen some for some certain movies, like for example, I think I came across a David Lynch movie, a couple of David Lynch movies where they were Blue Velvet, for instance, my favorite David Lynch movie. I think I've come across that on Blu-ray 4K, where it was listed $30 to $50 just for one movie, which is completely insane. Granted, the quality is amazing. It's packed with hours of special features. The transfer is just immaculate, and the actual artwork, the packaging itself is incredible. But they're really expensive. I own probably a handful of Criterion. I don't own a lot. Criterion is an amazing company. They but for years they kind of just specialized. I felt, just being a fan of a lot of those movies, and I've rented a lot of. Opera House Video has a pretty good selection of the Criterion Collection. So over the years, I've rented a bunch, and then I have bought a few. But they typically always kind of focused on a lot of European films. which are great and they're all classics. But I noticed the last couple of years they've been venturing out and doing other things. So I was really surprised and blown away by the George Romero classic, Night of the Living Dead. They've started, I would say, probably the last couple of years or so. They started, doing some horror movies too, which is pretty amazing. So, and the only place that sells Criterion, like I don't buy things online, but there's Barnes and Noble, which is in Augusta, Maine, which is about an hour away from here. They have a massive selection of Criterion. They have pretty much the entire collection of all of their titles in shop. And I have bought quite a few movies from there. But again, they're so expensive that it's very rare when I buy them. And I don't see the prices really coming down on them. But, it's definitely like a boutique kind of a thing. But anyway, the other films that are on here, House on Haunted Hill, of course, a classic, just an amazing film with Vincent Price. I have that. I don't have that on Blu-ray. I have it on DVD, but I have two or three editions of it, and it's one is actually really good quality. But again, amazing movie. I don't believe I've done a show on that film, but amazing movie. The Carnival of Souls is another movie that is just one of the greatest horror movies ever. I love that movie to death, but I have to get a good copy of that. I only have, well, to be honest, shitty copies of that film. I have it's on this collection, and I also have it on another DVD collection, and it's on both versions of the film that I have, which are DVD. The quality is atrocious. It's almost unwatchable, but I did watch it on this other set that I have, and I've only seen it twice, and I was completely blown away by what an amazing film it is. I need to definitely get an upgrade of that film. And these films that I'm talking about right now are movies that I left out of as far as reviewing for this channel for this segment. I don't believe I have a separate. I have to check. Sometimes it's easy to lose track, but I don't believe I have any reviews of Carnival of Souls on this channel, which needs to happen. Um, so those three movies, and then there was also Count Dracula and his Vampire Brides, of course, starring the iconic Christopher Lee. I do believe I did a show on that, and that is a classic Hammer film starring the iconic Christopher Lee. I have that on. I have a really good DVD copy of that. I don't own it on Blu-ray, but an amazing movie. What else can be said about the Hammer films? They're just iconic. I think I did a series of shows last year or maybe early this year, but I definitely did a show where I covered a whole bunch of the Hammer classics, and I do believe I did a show on that. That was included on here, so I decided since I own it and I believe I've done a show on it, I was not going to do a coverage of it. But amazing classic. The other film that I have done a show on, and that is the Last Man on Earth, starring Vincent Price. I have that. I have a few copies of that on DVD. One copy I have of it is actually pretty good. That would be a great addition to my collection as far as definitely getting it on Blu-ray. It's a classic. It's a series of films. Basically, the original is, well, actually, I should say the original. There's been about three or four different versions of this story, and it's a post-apocalyptic zombie film, more or less. The the original version of of this film, The Last Man on Earth, was this one, The Last Man on Earth, starring Vincent Price. And then later on, there was another version that came out called The Omega Man with Charlton Heston, which is super badass. Also, I really love that movie. That one, I almost, without knocking the original, which is such a classic, but I really love the Charlton Heston version because it's just a little bit more. I don't know. It's a little bit more campy and a little bit more goofy, but it's still got the whole. You still get that sense of dread and isolation, and it's very different than the Vincent Price version, which was the original. And then many years later, Will Smith starred in I Am Legend, which is another version of the same story. I didn't realize that until quite a few years ago that was the case, and I had seen all of those films like in passing. Well, I should say I didn't see the Omega Man until only maybe a couple of years ago. I had heard of it. I had definitely had seen Last Man on Earth as a kid a bunch of times. Love Vincent Price. But I remember when I saw I Am Legend, I was like, I do like that movie quite a bit, and I think it is really good. I do own that on Blu-ray. I don't. I think I did a show on that. Again, I have to check, but great film. Very different. The but essentially it's a remake of the Last Man on Earth. And it was kind of a revelation for me being a fan of that film. Like, oh wow, there's all of these other different versions of the same film, and they're all very different. The theme and the storyline is very much the same, but stylistically they're very different. And so very cool movie. All three of them are just awesome. I do own that one on Blu-ray. So the rest of these films that are part of this collection are films I have never seen. The and again, there's 15 movies on here, and there's two discs, and there's movies on both sides. So it's I'm very happy that I bought this because even though the quality for some of these films is kind of shit, it's still worth having. Just for being a film fanatic and being a fan, being a collector, but more or less just being, turned on to a lot of movies I've never seen before. So very cool. One of the best movies I've seen on here is the Pix, starring Karen Black, 1973, which is this Canadian horror movie, which is I was just blown away by that. I've never seen it before. I did a review of that in a video the other day, so check that out. It's truly is an amazing movie, and that is one I will definitely getting put together a show on. And today's show is on another movie called Nightmare Castle. And again, it's a movie I've never seen before. Very cool movie. And it came out in 1965. The premise of the film is pretty awesome. It's kind of has a theme a little bit. I think it was inspired by 2 Degree Frankenstein. The premise of the movie is a deranged scientist played by Dr. Stephen Arrowsmith catches his beautiful wife conducting an affair with their gardener. Dr. Arrowsmith then imprisons the lovers in his laboratory. Chained to the wall, Muriel and David suffer the slow and painful deaths as the vicious Arrowsmith basically tortures them to death. And so it's kind of like, well, what is called now torture porn. For instance, I went to go see the new Saw movie, which was awesome, and I did a show on that also just recently. And I had mentioned that I had asked a buddy of mine to go to it, and he's like, "No, I'm not going to go to that. I don't do torture porn," and I just think it was pretty funny. And I don't I get it, and then I don't get it. I think it's like it's a little bit of it's a little bit of an ignorant way to look at, and an easy way to label something. Again, a lot of those films obviously deal with that. Films like Hostel, and a lot of the grindhouse horror exploitation films. There are a lot of movies where they do explore bondage and S&M and psychosexual themes. So there are torture scenarios. There are people being, put in dungeons. But this film, you know, definitely deals with that. And it is kind of wild to think that this film came out when it did. It came out in '65, and it's pretty wild. It's a trip. I really like this film. I've never seen it before. It's an Italian movie. It was directed by Mario Chiano or Sciano, Mario Sciano. And the other thing that is amazing about this film is, which I was just totally into, the film score was written and performed by Ennio Morricone, who of course is, one of my favorite composers ever. He recently passed away the last year or so, and he is most well known for all of the great, spaghetti western films that he did with Sergio Leone. He also did, which I think is probably overall his best work. He scored the music for John Carpenter's The Thing, one of the most amazing composers ever, and such a he had such a sense of style. Yeah, I just one of the before he passed away, he actually won the Academy Award for The Hateful Eight, which is a western that was directed by Quentin Tarantino, which I think is just an amazing film. And he scored the music for that, and that movie went on to win a bunch of awards, Academy Awards, including it got Ennio Morricone a rightfully deserved Academy Award for best composition for film score. Just an amazing, amazing music, and he got that award. Luckily, I believe it was a year or two before he passed away. So, but I was really blown away. I did not know he did the score for this film, and so it was super cool. And the music is just amazing. Just Ennio Morricone just has this incredible use of these like haunting melodies that he's able to create, and they just have a lot of emotion to them. I did a film review uh, recently where the same thing happened. I was super pumped. I didn't know that he did the score for that particular film, and I was like, wow. And I'm always blown away. Two composers that I'm always blown away by how many different films they did, or I should say two or three different composers that really sometimes they get you know looked at by the public as they kind of only do a particular thing. Angelo Badalamenti, for instance, he's my favorite film composer of all time, and typically, I mean, he's done all of the David Lynch films, and a lot of I've had people in passing or friends say, well, it's he kind of does the same thing all the time, or it's always his films always kind of have the same his film scores always have the same theme and kind of the same method behind it, but and he obviously had a very unique style. But over the years, I've discovered lots of work that he's done of where it's very, very different, and you can't recognize his kind of typical aesthetic in his work. And that's been a really cool discovery. Another composer too, where that's happened a lot, is John Williams, of course, of Star Wars. Over the last few years, I've watched quite a few movies of where he scored these films, and they were very, very different. And he really had lots of different shades to his ability. And also Ennio Morricone, he's another composer where I was, again, just blown away by how diverse his sound palette was, and how broad his creative mind was. And this isn't it. This film here is another example of that. I definitely recommend this film. It's pretty awesome. It's kind of demented. It's a little bit wacky. It's definitely a very low budget Italian movie, and but I loved it. I thought it was great. It's definitely like kind of a sleazy exploitation movie. It's not super uber graphic, but it does have some things in it that are definitely pretty taboo. It explores, of course, lots of taboos around kind of S&M and bondage, but which is awesome. And it does have it leaves it's not particularly graphic. There are certain scenes and certain things that happen in scenarios in the film that are pretty graphic, but it definitely implies a lot of those things rather than showing them. And I think sometimes, like, I love films and things of where they are graphic, but I always feel like the story, whatever it is, even if it's a wacky out to lunch kind of a story, I always feel like it has to be kind of grounded a little bit in reality, and it has to be, you know, relatively strong, pretty good. It has to have pretty good acting, but the main selling point, like I've said many times, is if the film has a really cool atmosphere and it's kind of rich, then I'm usually engaged with it, and I generally usually like the movie a lot or love the movie. And this film definitely has a really cool, rich atmosphere. The quality of this again is not very good. It's pretty decent. The transfer of this film to from probably originally filmed, then VHS, and then DVD. So the quality is not very good. Obviously, it's like third level, third grade DVD. But anyway, it's worth watching. Super excited that I came across this film. So I definitely recommend it. It's a pretty fun ride. Definitely a cool example of these, really kind of sleazy Italian horror films that were coming out. And, again, like I said, this could be looked at by people, today as, torture porn because of the themes. And, like you have films like the Saw franchise, for instance, movies like Hostel, the Hostel franchise, and there's, quite a few other. The Human Centipede, I think, is kind of considered to be that too, which I do love. I do love that franchise, and especially the first one. I do own that on Blu-ray. But I think at the end of the day, they're just really good movies. I understand that not everybody is going to have the threshold that maybe I have as far as watching films that are particularly graphic, and those films are very graphic. This film isn't so graphic, but it does have some scenes, and it does imply, and it does go into some pretty dark spaces and territory. But I could see people looking at this as like, oh, this is like, you know, I sometimes think when people look at, like for instance, going to see the new Saw movie, and my buddy didn't want to go, which is fine. But I think to just kind of attach a label to it and dismiss it as like, oh, that's just torture porn, I'm not going to see it. I think that's, you can like what you like, but I think that that's a little bit of a hang up as far as a personal hang up of where that can impede on you having a good experience watching a film because you have a hang up and you have a preconceived notion of what something is, even though you haven't seen it. And I know that obviously people have certain forms of thresholds that they can only go to, but in realistic terms, if you like horror films, I don't think that those films that I mentioned are any necessarily more graphic than a lot of other films that come out. So but it has. I think sometimes when people just say, "Oh," they dismiss and say, "Oh, it's just torture porn." I think it has kind of a derogatory and a little bit of an insultive thing around it, and so there's a stigma around it. So that prevents people from wanting to see it because they assume that's all it is. But those films are actually pretty good, and this is could be considered to be a very very early version of that kind of a thing. So, but I still think it's a pretty awesome movie. Super fun. Definitely a good classic, you know, trashy Italian exploitation movie. So definitely check it out. So this is Jason Dean. So thanks again, and we will see you next time. Peace.